It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. I am Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulsen. 10 years in the NFL as a tight end for him. 5 years as a reporter for me. Now I host a daily radio show. If you're new, that's us. Thanks for joining us. And we got a fun one for you today. And Logan, I think it's important to introduce ourselves off the top because I think we might cause some waves in the NFC East today.
Why do you say that? Because
So
we're
here's what
ranking
we're
all
gonna.
the positions?
Yeah, people are protective of their teams.
I gotcha.
And what
I
we're
see
gonna
what you're
do
saying.
today is we did this last year as well, but we're gonna take every position group, and I'll explain how we're breaking those down in a second. On the offensive side in the NFC East, and we're going to rank them 1 through 4. Obviously, the 4 teams of the NFC East, and we're going to do it this way: quarterbacks, running backs, pass catchers, so wide receivers, tight ends clumped together. How do you feel about that as our resident tight end?
I mean, I think that's the way the position's going. I think they should be clustered that way. They're almost like big body wide receivers, especially for some of the teams around the division, which we'll talk about more later. But yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay. And then offensive line, obviously,
Yeah.
very important. We did our confidence rankings for the Commanders yesterday, so it's going to be fun to kind of see where these groups land amongst the Commanders and how we feel about various parts of that football team. And then obviously the division as a whole. So we're going to start with the big one. We're going to start with quarterback. Although you might argue the big one's wide receiver, tight end, of course. But we're going to start with quarterback. And let me lay down this one other ground rule, so to speak, to get started. We are doing this based off of the ability to win in 2023. We are not doing how they're building their franchise. We're not doing long-term prognosis. It is for 2023. Who would you rather have? Period. So if people want to bring up, for instance, as I'm sure we will talk about, Daniel Jones' contract over the long term, that's not relevant to this conversation. What we're talking about is the ability to play football in 2023 for the football team that the player or the group is playing for, and how much we like that setup. So with that said, Logan, I think number one's pretty easy. Jalen Hurts led the Eagles to the Super Bowl last year. Then you got Dak Prescott, Daniel Jones, and the Sam Howell, Jacoby Brissett combo. Most likely we're looking at Howell here, but how do you start to stack these up once you get past the easy one and Hurts at 1?
Yeah, I think it's becoming a little bit more challenging for me. It used to be kind of like, Dak Prescott was the guy in the division. And I don't know, man, like every year I feel like you watch him and, he does have moments of greatness where he looks awesome. But, is he just a better publicized like Kirk Cousins at this point in his career? And, I don't know. And that used to be an indictment. I think Kirk's a good player, he was a top 12 quarterback last year. And I think Dak Prescott definitely, depending on the year, has an opportunity to do that. But I think those guys kind of get you beat. And I think he's a guy that just seemingly every single year is so reliant on his supporting cast. And, I think they got a pretty good one this year, which we're going to talk about more as the show goes. But, I was so impressed last year with what Daniel Jones did, for the Giants in terms of just elevating an offense that just had nothing. They just had nothing. So I know this is a subjective thing, but part of me wants to lean Daniel Jones here ever so slightly. I think maybe if you go history, maybe if you go pedigree, you say Dak Prescott, but I've just not been overly impressed with him the last 2 years. And I think Dallas fans probably feel the same way to a certain extent. So to me, that's a tough one. And then I think it's kind of 1-2 there. And then I think you're kind of in the Sam Howell, Jacoby Brissett at 4, just from, and again, we said this on the show on Monday, but I have a lot of faith in Sam. I have a lot of faith in Jacoby, but they just have not done it yet at the same level those other guys have. So I think that's why I'm a little they got to show me. I think they can win football games, but it's a little bit of an unproven commodity at the moment.
So I had the same thought about Jones and Prescott, but the more I think about it, the more I still would put Prescott second. Here's why.
Yeah.
I think it's expectation based. I think Dak has underperformed expectations. Jones has overperformed. However, if you actually put them head to head, who's better? And I
But
think the answer is still Prescott. So in other words, like if you do it based off expectations, you expect Prescott to be an A. All of a sudden he comes in at a B minus or a B, right?
I think he's
And you're like,
worse.
damn,
Yeah, yeah,
that's not great. Like he's supposed to be an A guy. He's now a B. Jones, you expect to be a C, he comes in at a B minus, and you're like, wow, look at Daniel Jones. Well, B is still better than B minus. And
yeah.
I think what you were about to start to say is, well, Prescott hasn't even been a B, and we can get into that in a second. But I think there is still this ceiling for Dak that he hits more often. For instance, no greater example than the final 3 games he played last year in terms of the wild inconsistency,
Right.
where he is against the Niners in the game they lose. He's 23 of 37 for 206, a touchdown and 2 picks. But in the divisional game against Tampa, he's 25 of 33, only 8
Yeah.
incompletions in a playoff game for 305, 4 touchdowns and no picks. And everyone's talking about, oh my God, like if this is Dak, like the Cowboys are going to the Super Bowl. And that, of course, comes out the week after. He was awful against Washington, 14
Yeah.
of 37 for 128. He threw for 282 the week before that, 347 against Philly on Christmas Eve last year. So, like, he still has these games where he throws for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, 4, 5, 6 times a season. And Jones doesn't really do that. Now he's asked to do different things, and I realize that's part of it is the rushing and kind of more of a game management mentality than Dak, who's asked to make some plays. And I do think Dak has come down from his level a couple years ago, in part because he doesn't run anymore, especially
Yeah.
post ankle injury. He doesn't have the same rushing threat that he used to, where Jones has that. So when you talk about total yardage, it starts to get a little bit closer. And obviously, we know quarterback rushing yards have an outsized impact on the game. But I still think, like, head to head, Prescott is slightly better than Jones. Although I think those are the two close. Like, that's definitely the hardest decision you have to make here.
Yeah, and my rebuttal to that would be like if you took Dak Prescott and put him on that New York Giants offense last year, like what do you get?
Fair.
Because that offense was not good. The O line was not great. I think the kind of the bright spot of the offense was their third wide receiver. You know what I'm saying? Slayton, right? Slayton was the third wide receiver who becomes their
Was
one. Does that
no
make
Slayton was the one who became the 3, I think.
No, but because at the beginning of the season, they had those 2 other guys, both one tore his Achilles in training camp, and then the other tore his hamstring or tore his ACL. Remember on running in that weird stop route like week 4 of the season. Slayton
Yeah.
was supposed to be their third kind of top end speed guy, big play guy. He ends up being the one for most of the year. They bring in Hodgins from Buffalo off the practice
Yeah,
squad.
that's the kid I was thinking of, is
And
Hodgins,
he's
who
and
came
he's a
in and,
good
like,
football
yeah.
player, but like in terms of supporting cast, man, like I know it's hard to play receiver in the NFL, but you want more weapons around you than that. So I look at what he did and how he elevated the offensive line. A lot of that credit needs to go to Brian Daboll. You know what I mean? And Kafka and that offensive staff who did an excellent job. So it's hard to kind of parcel that out. But I'm like, he really, Daniel Jones really did a great job of playing efficient football, elevating that roster really. And again, Wink Martindale and that defense deserves some credit, but it's tough. And I do think I kind of get what you're saying. I think Dak has a little bit more high upside from an explosive play standpoint, which is probably why I lean that way. But is that because he's got CeeDee Lamb and Gallup and one of the best offensive lines in football? Like it's hard for me to kind of separate him from the stuff that's around him. And I think if he's up in New York last year, it's a garbage fire, and Jones was at least
Yeah.
able to make it something serviceable. Now, again, there's the coordinator is a huge, huge element of that. But yeah, I think I guess I'd probably lean Dak ever so slightly, but I don't feel great about it just because of that question. It's
Yeah.
if Dak was in New York and Jones was in Dallas, what's that conversation look like? Are they totally different players?
It's a great question, but I think you also bring up something that could almost be used to counter your point, which is he then have Brian Daboll as his head coach. And,
That's true.
last year, Kellen Moore, I don't know what to make of Kellen Moore because
Yeah.
everyone in Dallas can't stand him. Everyone around the NFL thinks he's a genius. The Chargers couldn't hire him fast enough.
Right.
But he's also working with Mike McCarthy, who, again, I have no idea what to make of Mike McCarthy. He won a Super
Yeah.
Bowl with Aaron Rodgers, and Aaron Rodgers was at the peak of his powers. He probably should have won more Super Bowls with Aaron Rodgers at the peak of his powers. So is that actually a compliment or an indictment? I don't know, man. And now he's going to be basically running things on the offensive side down there in Dallas. And I don't know what that's going to look like. Because if we were to do a coordinator rankings, like that would get super interesting in this division, coordinator / coach rankings. And by the way, Philadelphia, that's also something we should mention is like
Sure.
Shane Steichen is gone. So for Hurts, who safely is still one because he's Jalen freaking Hurts, and he's earned that after last year, is it going to be as good?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Right.
That still could be really good, but who knows? Year two, they move some pieces around. We'll see. But then you obviously have this, similar questions here in Washington with Bieniemy and how he can design things, and we talked about that more extensively at the end of the pod on Monday of these question marks that we have with Bieniemy in terms of being a full-time play caller, in terms of how he adapts to things that he learns about his personnel during the season. And I think that's why, along with the inexperience, you certainly have to put Howell and Brissett fourth. It'd be fun to do this on a per dollar basis because I think that gets Hurts now the most expensive guy in the league, or one of them, depending on if we're looking at 2023. I can't remember the exact structure of his deal. Jones obviously signs the big one. Prescott's on a big deal. Washington guys on relatively cheap deals. Rookie contract for Hal and $10 million for Brissett. But yeah, man, it's a super fascinating quarterback division because even with Hurts, like he's non-traditional. What happens if they don't want to run him quite as much?
Sure.
How does it look during the regular season? Do they save that for the playoffs? Like there's a lot of questions, I think, at quarterback in this division with a ton of incredible upside, but a lot of unknown. Yeah. There's literally unknowns at every spot.
And talk about a guy who's really supported by a supporting cast. Like Jalen Hurts arguably has the best supporting cast in all of football, outstanding running back. Obviously Sanders has gone, Penny's in. He's very, very talented. Injury history. They sign Swift from Detroit, a guy who's very explosive football player. The receivers there, the offensive line. I mean, the scaffolding there for him is amazing, and they do a great job kind of keeping that roster really, really deep. So, in terms of just pure quarterback play, I think it's really hard to separate any of these guys. Like, I think Jalen Hurts is a little bit more than a scheme guy. I think he showed that with that playoff run last year. But it's hard to kind of say, like, one of the things I always talk about with like Joe Flacco, for example, or Russell Wilson, his first year in Seattle, was like those were some of the best rosters in football. And, when the roster started to deteriorate around a guy like Russell Wilson or a guy like Joe Flacco, the production falls off. And Russell Wilson, I think, is, arguably a Hall of Fame caliber player. But, when the roster's not there to support it, it's a totally different animal. So while I think Jalen Hurts definitely deserves to be number one, I think that's always something that needs to be considered with that type of guy. So, yeah, man, I think it's Jalen Hurts. I guess we're going to go Dak just because his body of work's been a little bit more impressive. He's been a more explosive player. Jones and then Howell, but I'm pretty on the fence. I think Dak and Jones are both in that kind of like, that 15 to, or, 22 to 15 range of quarterback that is good, that you're happy with, but you have to pay him and you can't really move on from him. So it's kind of a tough deal. And, I guess, edge to Dak, Jones, and then Howell, I think. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's how you got to do it. I really could probably, if we spent long enough, be convinced of Jones. Also, because I will not be surprised if it's week 6 and we're being like, yeah, we should have just put Jones there. Like year 2, that is the lingering thought is like Prescott loses more. McCarthy, I don't trust a whole lot as an offensive coordinator, and a guy calling plays and all that kind of stuff. He was so vanilla in Green Bay. And part of that also is I know Rodgers likes things pretty stripped down, so who knows? We'll get to really find out about McCarthy as a coordinator. But like year 2 with Daboll having an entire offseason of knowing Daniel Jones, and by the way, a better supporting cast. Last year, that was the easiest ranking we did was Giants wide receivers and tight end last. That was the easiest call of any of these groups that we did. So if you wanted to stand on the table to go draft style, like we got to take this guy. If you want to stand on the table for Daniel Jones, I'm down to put Daniel Jones second, but
Yeah.
I tend to think that Dak is probably still deserves to be the
Yeah,
second
I
guy.
just think I'd like to see another year, another year from
Okay.
Daniel Jones. I'm excited to see what they do with that offense up there. Again, that was one of the worst rosters in football, and I think you're expecting a little bit of progression from Evan Neal, the first round tackle last year. They bring in Darren Waller, they bring in Campbell. They get faster on that side of the football. They get a little more athletic. It's there's definitely a world where they're a very, very good football team, and he's playing much,
Yeah.
much better. But it's
And the
still like,
numbers reflect that, right? Because he
yeah,
played pretty well last year, but like
yeah,
the numbers weren't pretty. This year, the
yeah,
numbers could be a lot more
yeah.
explosive.
I think that's the thing is like he was super efficient. It was like their passing game was like a really efficient running game. It was like 5 yards here, 3rd and 2, keeper for a first down. Daniel Jones rushes or scramble. It just was like this really methodical, labored thing that was just really, really efficient. And I think that efficiency is going to improve this year with some more explosive playmakers and guys who are going to catch football. Think about the game, the first game that we played, or the second, yeah, the first game the Commanders played against New York, up in New York, and there was a couple balls that were dropped by the receivers, explosive
Yeah.
plays, and I thought, does that happen this year with the new supporting cast? But I agree. I think Dak two, just because the body of work's probably a little bit more consistent. But I agree with you. Daniel Jones, like week 6 or 7, could be in that could be in the conversation for two for sure.
Yeah, in fairness to Jones, he did throw for 300 in a playoff game against Minnesota.
Yeah.
Real quick, Nick, not to step on your Nick's numbers bit here, but I am going to throw out a quick number. Jones last year threw for 3,205, so 3,205 yards. You going over under 3,450?
Me? I'm going
Yeah,
over. I'm going over on that.
so am I. So am I. I think it's going to be 36, 37 this year, probably. All right, let's move on to the skill positions.
Yep.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. I am Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulson. All right, this is a fun one. Running backs across the division, because you got some really, really good ones in all four spots. I don't know what to do with Dallas with Tony Pollard. Do we just assume he's going to be healthy? Do we
I
just
guess
go
so.
with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. For the purpose of this rankings, we're assuming a healthy Tony Pollard. So they obviously lose Zeke. They got Tony Pollard, Malik Davis, Ronald Jones, who they bring in from Tampa, and then Deuce Vaughn, who they drafted. That's their running back group. We have obviously Robinson, Gibson, Rodriguez here. They've got Matt Breida to back up Saquon
Yeah.
in New York. And then Philly, the way ESPN's listening on their depth chart, they got DeAndre Swift as the starter, but it'll be Swift and Penny, and they still got Kenneth Gainwell and Boston Scott on the roster as well.
Yeah.
Go ahead and get started, because I honestly don't know. It just feels like four really good rooms, and I don't really know how to rank them. Like someone's going to be very disappointed to be last here.
I mean, for me, it's like the best group in the division is Washington, in my opinion. Like if I'm starting a team, that's what I want. I want a very consistent kind of every down back in Brian Robinson who can run between the tackles, has explosive ability, enough explosive ability to keep you honest. His vision's off the chart. He elevates the offensive line in a way that I don't think a lot of other backs in the division do. That's not a knock on them. I think his vision is just like an elite trait for him. And then to have the explosive playmaking ability of Gibson, which we haven't really seen here, but I think with Bieniemy, I'm kind of betting that we do see that. And I think the depth piece of Christian Rodriguez is going to be, or Chris Rodriguez, excuse me, is going to be very, very nice. And I don't really think, Patterson's here. They've got some good pieces in terms of depth. And I just think
Williams.
Williams. Thank you.
I mean, all those guys. So what, like someone is going to be on the practice squad that's a NFL quality fourth.
I think so. And I think that when I look at that, I'm like, man, that's the group I want. Like when I look at Philly, for example, I think what they're banking on is that they have the best offensive line in football. And I think they might have even gotten better this offseason with the draft, which is crazy to think about. But I think they're a very, very, very good group. And I think, Rashard Penny had the highest yards per carry last year when he was playing, but is also one of the most injury-prone players in all of football, right? And then Gainwell is a converted receiver, much like Gibson, very good football player, but I definitely think those guys are elevated by running behind like one of the best the best offensive line since that Dallas team back in what was that, 2013,
2013.
14, whatever
Yeah.
that was. So that's kind of the group that they're running behind. And I think you see good production from this group, kind of who depending on who's blocking in front of them. And I'd say New York would probably be my number two because Saquon's there, but I just don't know if
Mm,
they have the depth that this room has here in Washington. And while
right.
Saquon his ceiling's very high, you need a couple good running backs in the NFL. That's just how the position's going. So I think the group that I'm probably least excited about is Dallas. I think Pollard, everyone's excited about him getting more touches. For me, I think one of the reasons he was successful is because he wasn't taking all these touches. And now that he's going to be getting a lot of touches, I think he's going to be much less effective on a down to down basis. So I think they need to think about some depth there. I think he's a very good player, but yeah, that's kind of my high level thoughts on the division at running back. And I just think, to me, it's we have the deepest group. We have two guys with a ton of upside, ton of talent that have played good football in the NFL. And I know there's some talks about Gibson not being the most efficient runner, and I get that, but I do think his usage pattern is going to be much more diverse and speak to his skill set in a way that we haven't seen in the last 3 years since he's been here.
Yeah, for being inefficient, he's been hella productive.
Yeah.
He still was a 1,000-yard rusher a couple of years ago. What are
No.
we
Yeah.
talking about with him? So, I think people get way too caught up sometimes in some of that stuff. And I also the coaching of Bieniemy, former running backs coach, he's gonna get better. As you said, the usage, the screen game, which has been non-existent, is going to be a huge factor. Some of the misdirection they use is going to help spring big runs. There's so much potential for the running backs here. I think I agree with you because it seems like everywhere else there's either high end or depth, and
Yeah.
Washington has both.
Both. Yeah.
Robinson has a chance to be the leading rusher in the division.
Yeah.
Gibson is fantastic. Rodriguez, again, I said this on the early week pod, but he is the Isaiah Pacheco. Just give the ball to the angry guy and let him
Yeah.
just run through people like they stole something from him. That is the Chris Rodriguez, Isaiah Pacheco model, which obviously worked very well for Pacheco last year in Kansas City under Bieniemy. So there are three deep there that could be very good if Rodriguez is good. And as you mentioned, whether it's Williams or Patterson who makes the team as the fourth, or either one of those guys on the practice squad as a depth piece to be able to boost up, they're NFL backs with NFL experience that within this scheme and system, I think could be effective. I struggle with 2 versus 3 because I
Yeah.
do really like it depends on if Rashad Penny's healthy, right? If
Yeah.
Penny stays healthy and Swift stays healthy, because he's had a couple of injury concerns as
Yeah.
well, I think I tend to put the Eagles second because, Boston Scott has had some monster carries
Gainwell's
for
great
them.
football.
Gainwell's been really good for them, and there's familiarity there. They do get to run behind that O-line, and what's the parameters that we put on this? It's you're set up for this season and
Yeah.
where you're at. So there is, would I rather be a Philly running back or a New York running back? I'd probably rather be a Philly running back. But I'd also probably rather be Saquon Barkley. And
Yeah.
if you go, who is the single best back in this division? It's obviously him. There is, to me, we're starting to get, and I can't believe we're saying this because this is so the cruel reality of running back in the NFL. We are getting to the point with Saquon where it's when does he start to slow down? We're only 5 years in, but we saw it happen with Zeke. And once it happens, it is a big freaking deal.
Yeah.
He has missed some time, which could help him less beating.
So.
Although when you miss time with injury, typically that's not something that's going to help you. But ultimately, what's the drop off between Saquon and Matt Breida? It's real big. Breida's fine. He's a real legitimate NFL running back, but it's not like these other teams in terms of the depth where you have a kind of a second starter. Penny's a starter.
Yeah.
Swift is a starter.
Yeah.
Gibson's a starter. Robinson's a starter. And so that would be my quarrel with 2 and 3. I agree with you that Dallas is fourth. Pollard's exciting, but also it's not like he's 22. He's 26. Yeah. He's been around and he has had the limited carries like you mentioned, but he hasn't, he's never been a lead back. And so the fact that they're having him be a lead back in a year where he's coming off a bad injury, I do have, even if we're saying he's going to be healthy, there's being able to play and then there's being at your best. And I don't know that he's going to be at his best. So I think I agree with you pretty safely on 1 being Washington.
Yeah.
Pretty safely on 4 being Dallas. I think the quibble is in the middle with with whether you, and it's just a matter of health. If
Yeah,
Philly stays healthy, they're
dude,
second.
they're
If
going to be
Saquon,
awesome.
yeah, if Saquon is healthy and Philly gets a little banged up, then I think you go second there. Because I guess also too, do you want to like quasi include Daniel Jones here
Yeah, I mean, you
as a
could.
runner?
I mean, but then if you're doing that, you got to include Jalen Hurts, and then Jalen Hurts,
Well,
like
yeah, I
it
guess
totally
that really solidifies it for Philly then.
totally breaks the scale, and I think I just think like again to me like Rashard Penny is one of like when he is healthy, he might be the most explosive back in all of football. Like it's crazy how efficient he is on a per touch basis. The problem is he just hasn't stayed healthy. He just hasn't done it. Like he's had that what was that 2021 when he like the last 5 games of the year he rushed for over 150 yards like 4 consecutive games. Like it was ridiculous. I'm probably being hyperbolic there, but it was something crazy efficient. He had over 5 yards a carry, but you only see that for little itsy bitsy time because he's always kind of nursing some type of injury. So if he's healthy, that rushing offense, that rushing attack there in Philly is going to be awesome. Swift, I think again, talk about a guy who's underachieved a little bit in terms of rushing efficiency. So not surprising to me that Detroit kind of decided to move on. I know he's a big name. I know he's an explosive runner. But I think the thing about him going to Philly is like he's rushing behind an offensive line that's super efficient, a running attack that allows for big running lanes, creates a ton of space because the quarterback's a threat to run because of the RPO stuff. So to me, he's a space player, and I just think that group, if they can stay healthy, I mean, and Gainwell's not a bad player. Like he's not a bad football
No.
player, and neither is Boston Scott. So I'd probably lean Philly, but again, the Rashad Penny thing, he has just historically been so banged up. I wouldn't count on him. So it's like
He's been in the league since 2018. He has less than 2,000 rushing yards for his career.
right.
Which, and by the way, that stretch I just looked it up. 2021, 4 of the last 5 games of that season, you weren't far off. He was over 130. He was 137. He had a 39-yarder dud against LA, but then he goes 135, 170, 190. So he did average over 150 in that 4 of 5 games.
Do you have his yards per carry there? It was insane. It was like 6 yards a carry, or whatever it was.
Yeah, but it was 8, 6, 3, 5, 7, 9, 6, 8, 8, 3.
I mean,
we'd have to do the math.
But look at that efficiency, though. And so again, in behind that old line, like to me, he could be the breakout player of the NFL, right? He could, rush for 1,000 yards on like 10 carries, damn near. That's an exaggeration, but he just has not
all in the shadow of your own end zone, all 100-yard touchdowns.
Yeah,
Bang,
but he has not been healthy. So to me, it's like I'm going to bank on the Commanders. I guess I go Philly because the upside is tremendous with that group. I mean, it's through the roof. And I guess you go New York, but it's only Saquon there. It's only Saquon. Right. And that's the only reason you give them that opportunity. And I'm not very confident in Dallas at the moment, just because I feel like they don't have – I think Tony Pollard's an excellent football player, but I think he's better when he's not carrying the lion's share of touches, when he gets some of those game plan touches like we talked about last year. So I feel pretty good about that order, actually.
Okay. I agree with you. All right. Put it on the graphic. Hit print. We got it. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulson. All right. Last 2, Logan. Got wide receiver, tight end together. Then we got O-line. Let's do wide receivers, tight ends first. This is a really tough one.
Tough.
There's some pretty significant wild cards in this division. Here's the high level overview. Washington's got this incredible 3 wide receiver trio: McLaurin, Dotson, Samuel. Depth pieces, I think there's questions about. We talked about that earlier in the week. Tight end, questions, but Logan Thomas has looked healthy in camp and looked good. John Bates, excellent blocking tight end. Then we'll see between Cole Turner, Curtis Hodges, etc.
And really high upside with those guys.
Really high upside guys. So that's the Washington group. New York has some of the biggest wild cards in here, mainly Darren Waller. They bring him in the offseason.
Yeah.
When he's healthy, he's the best tight end in the league, not named Travis Kelce or George Kittle, and he's frankly in that group. But talk about a player with health concerns. Jeez, he has missed a lot of time, and he's on the wrong side of 30. So he's a giant wild card. Paris Campbell underachieved in Indianapolis, but now let's see what he can do in New York. Darius Slayton, Isaiah Hodgins, who we mentioned earlier and is awesome. By the way, did you know the Giants signed Jamison Crowder?
I did know that. Yeah. I
They
mean,
also
like,
got Jalen Hyatt in the draft. So
and also their backup tight end there is a good football player.
Bellinger.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know
Bellinger.
you're a big Bellinger fan.
He's
All
got big
right, the
biceps,
cow.
man. I'm in on that.
Super intriguing group in Dallas.
Yeah.
CeeDee Lamb, who's awesome. Brandon Cooks, who they signed in the offseason, who's played for 150 of the 32 NFL teams. Michael Gallup, a year removed from the ACL. And then tight end, bunch of guys that giant question marks after they let what's his name, Dalton Schultz, go in the
Yeah.
offseason. Jake Ferguson, Peyton Hendershot, and then they got your guy Luke Schoonmaker in the draft. And then, of
And
course, in
their
Philly,
depth there, sorry to cut you off. Their depth there is also kind of interesting. You got Jalen Tolbert, who is supposed to be kind of this big play, explosive guy. You got Simi Fahenko, who from Stanford, who tested like AJ Brown. He's like 6'5", he's 230. Every year in training camp, this is his third year. Everyone talks about him being this. So they have like interesting depth pieces there also, which
sure,
I think makes
Kavontae
them,
Turpin,
yeah,
returner. Yeah,
makes them kind of gives them an edge over. I don't want to say over Washington because I think the top three might be better, but the depth there is a little bit more exciting, I think, at the moment. Just to kind of put that out there. So go ahead, continue
yeah.
with.
And then Philly has AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Quez Watkins. By the way, did you see that Devin Allen ran the fourth fastest time in the world in the
Yeah,
110-meter
I
hurdles
saw
this
that.
weekend? So
Dude,
he's still
dude's
floating
fast.
around. Yeah, super fast. Zacchaeus, Greg Ward still floating around. And then at tight end, Dallas Goddard. And then they've got a couple of depth pieces as well. It's tough, man. I don't know where to go here. I mean,
If
Philly's obviously
I, th-
loaded.
I think I would
I
probably
really like
go.
Washington. Dallas has a say. I think
I
New
saw,
York's fourth. I feel,
so
and they still
I'll,
could be good.
I'll start talking and you tell me when to stop. So I will say, I'd say I'd probably go Philly because I think, as much as it pains me to say it, I think they have the best receiver in the division, and I think they have the best tight end in the division outside of Darren Waller. At least someone you can kind of bank on, right? And I think that combination, maybe the best number two as well. Like that is a stacked skill position group.
Just for extra clarity, you're saying Brown's one, Smith is two, because there are weeks that it could be the other way around.
Yeah, right. I'm saying Brown's one, and I'd say
Yeah.
I'm giving him a slight edge over Terry, right? And
Yep.
I'm going to say, and then I would say
Devontae.
Devontae is number two, and I would give him a slight edge over Jahan. So
Yep.
like it's kind of how I feel about that. I would probably go Washington. I think, and again, I'm probably a little high on Logan Thomas after seeing him in OTAs because he looked really good. But Terry, and I think you get the three guys there. You get Terry, you get Jahan, you get Curtis Samuel, you get Logan, and that group is pretty formidable. It's very consistent, and I think I would bet on it again with the new coordinator over a team like Dallas, which I am very high on. I'm very high on their skill position guys. I think Washington has a better tight end at the moment. I think CeeDee Lamb is very, very good, but I don't think Brandon Cooks is. I think he's good. I just think the upside here is a little bit better for us in terms of route running, diversity of the position kind of stuff. So it's close though. Dallas and Washington are very, very close, and kind of beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I'm going to go a little homer bias here and just say I'm betting on our guys here, betting on Terry and betting on Jahan to get better, betting on Logan to be better, betting on the usage to be better. And I think the usage in Dallas is going to be worse because Mike McCarthy's not. I think he's fine, but I don't think he's got like this innovative offensive mind the way some of these other teams do. And I think that leaves the Giants is kind of the way I would look at it.
Yeah, I think the Giants are the easiest one to rank. They're last. Not that they have not improved, not that they're good, or not that they're bad, not that they couldn't be good. And it really just is giant wild card of Waller's health. Like when your number one playmaker is that unreliable from a health standpoint over the course of years, that's a tough pill to swallow.
I
And it's
mean,
hard to have high confidence in that.
to your point though, like he quite honestly is and I'm being maybe, no, I believe this. When he's healthy, he's the most dangerous playmaker in the division. Like that's how good I think he is at football. The problem is, to your point, like he just has not been healthy. I mean, when was his last good year? I think it was like 2021, 2020, something like that. Like he was dominant, but it's just so hard to rely on that guy. He's like changed his life. His story is awesome. He's a great success story, but man, like he's not been healthy. and you
Yeah,
need him to be
he
healthy.
had 1,100 yards in 2019, almost 1,200 in 2020. He played 11 games in 2021, but he only had 665 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns.
I think that was the year he
And
like pulled his
then,
hamstring or something. Yeah.
yeah, he just wasn't himself. And then last year only played 9 games, 388 and 3
Yeah.
touchdowns. But like he really had one incredible season, 2 really good
Yeah.
seasons. That 2019 season, 1145, but only 3 touchdowns. And then 2020's, 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns. So
And I think
he's, yeah,
there's a
very
guy
Jordan
too.
Reed-esque.
Yeah, there's a guy there, I think also where I would say I'd bank on Kafka and Dayball maximizing him if he can stay healthy. Like I think he's poised. I am very high on him. Like when he was at his peak playing tight end, I was like, there's nothing this guy can't do. He can beat your number one corner playing receiver, like with speed, with suddenness, which is there. Like Kelsey, for example, can beat your number one corner, but it's off of kind of savvy, short area burst. Like there's no tight end in football that can just line up at receiver and I'll be like, I'm gonna run a go, cover me. Like dude is a physical freak. He has excellent routes. He's good in the run game. Like I am so high on him, but much like Rashard Penny, like I don't care how high I am on you. Like if you're not playing football, like we're gonna
Yeah.
be in a little bit of trouble here.
So, I mean, I like Slayton. I like some of the other pieces. And the thing is, they're so well coached, but I still think you have to put them fourth. I agree with you. Dallas is third. I think they just don't have a lot of variety in their skill position. Like they're a speed built team. Brandon Cooks, speed guy, Gallup, speed guy. And like, I don't, you look at like the route tree that Jahan Dotson can
Yeah,
run, and even Curtis Samuel. Like Curtis Samuel can run anything.
yeah,
Not quite as crisp. Maybe he's a little bit more Brandon Cooksy. But if that's your third guy, and by the way, that guy also plays some running back for you in an
yeah,
Eric Bieniemy offense, that's a very, very different thing than what they got going on in Dallas. So I would say they're third, Dallas firmly, and then it's a matter of like who do you like, Washington or Philly? And I think anybody that's not being horrendously biased would have to say Philly. I agree with you that Terry's just a tick below, and that pains me because I
yeah,
love Terry McLaurin.
yeah. So do I.
And I'm excited to see what he can do this year. But Terry's just a tick below AJ Brown, and I think Jahan is just a tick below Devontae. Although I think there's a chance that switches. Not because Devontae's not awesome, just Jahan's a little
Yeah,
bigger. Has some really, really special high end, top end speed. Like we'll see. And then obviously Curtis and what he can do, and then the tight end. So with Dallas Goedert, like that's a separator to me. That might
yeah.
be the biggest separator, is like the drop off from Goddard to Logan Thomas. Even if Logan's good, is still
And it's
it's
the
noticeable,
consistency.
even if you don't want to call it significant.
It's the consistency too. Like
Yeah.
Logan, I think at his peak is definitely in that conversation, but it's, an injury and lack of usage last year, like all those things. And I think that'll be better this year. So I think that'll be closer this year for 2023 than the past couple of years. But I do think Goddard's just been the way he's using that offense, the way he make plays. It's just the consistency, and I'm going to bet on that. So I think that they have the number one skill position group, and also they have the best quarterback. So I think that also elevates that group, which is
That tends to help.
yeah, which helps.
All right. So skill position or I mean running back technically skill position too, but pass catcher group. We're going Philly, Washington, Dallas, New York, which brings us to last but certainly not least, offensive line.
Yeah,
Start with Philly. Mailata, Dickerson, Kelsey,
dude.
Jurgens, Lane Johnson.
And
Ridiculous.
they drafted Steen in the second round. Like that group is like I don't
Yeah.
know, man. They just like restock, retool. They develop guys. Like we talk about Brian Callahan a lot on this show, or not Bill. Excuse me, Brian's his
Bill
son,
Callahan.
Bill.
Yeah.
But that O line coach in Philly might be the best at one of the other kind of guys that is really excellent at developing talent, and they deserve a ton of credit. That group, when you watch them, they are so physically dominant. Like you don't see double teams the way those guys double team. You don't see just a bunch of just big athletic dudes. Like I think the average offensive line weight's like 325 for them, which is huge. Lane Johnson's maybe the best player, best offensive lineman in football. Trent Williams might have something to say about it, but very,
Yeah.
very excellent.
I would probably take Trent, but like Lane's right there, and that's saying
Yeah,
something.
that's saying something. Dickerson's one of the best guards in football. Kelsey probably best center in football. Mailata, is probably a top 10, maybe even top 8 type left tackle, which is crazy because he's never played football before. Obviously, they lost their right guard to in free agency to Detroit,
Tennessee, Detroit,
wherever,
Tennessee.
a blue team, and
Shout
and
out to the blue teams.
but they have done a good job of having depth pieces, and they drafted, and they're just always restocking, retooling along that group. So to me, it's like Philly, not only in the division but in the NFL, is probably the best group.
Yeah.
So
Done. Easy. All right. So I'm going to read off the other three real quick, and then we can debate them. So Dallas has Tyron Smith, Tyler Smith, Biadasz. Sorry.
yeah, he's new. Yeah.
Sorry to their center, whose name. If only their backup was their starter. I can say that last name. It's Brock Hoffman.
Oh, there
so
you
that's
go.
my long lost cousin. Zach Martin, Terrence Steele. So that's the Cowboys. Giants are going Andrew Thomas, Ben Breedson, John Michael Schmitz, Mark Glowinski, and then Evan Neal. And they got some depth pieces, obviously, as well. And then obviously here we know it's Leno, Charles, Gates, Cosme, Wiley. How do you rank them?
So I'd probably go Dallas next. Just even though they're getting old, like Tyron Smith is a shadow of his former self. Zach Martin's still playing, probably top 3 guard in the NFL still, really good football player. I like Tyler Smith, but a lot of growing that needs to happen. Former first round pick. The center's new. I don't really value center that highly. Terrence Steele did a great job last year. So, awesome. I think that group is good. The depth pieces there too, I like a lot. I think they did a good job kind of having people that can play some football for you. But they are kind of at a tipping point. I think they really need to think about Tyron Smith and where he's going. Physically, always kind of banged up. Can't rely on him for 16 games. But I think the rest of that group is pretty good. But they are at kind of an inflection point in terms of like they're like a year, maybe 2 away from totally falling apart.
Totally. With Tyron / with Tyler Smith, would you, if Tyron misses time, would you kick Tyler Smith out, or do you think he just needs to live at guard and that's his home?
I mean, I think he did a good job last year playing tackle, and I think having some flexibility. I mean, that's why everyone talks about position flex. That's a perfect example. Like, he's athletic enough to do it. He's got some upside. I mean, shoot, he did a good job last year playing left tackle for him. I think you want him to live at guard as much as possible, which is another reason why that. Like, I think their backup right tackle is Witowski. Is that his name? Do you have it in front of you?
I am not seeing a Witowski
It's
or anything like that.
Wituszki. He's from. Anyway, he is a guy that has a lot of high upside stuff.
Oh, there it is. Well, let's go.
Let's go. Thank you. So he's got a lot of high upside. So maybe you feel good about him in year 3 coming in and playing some football, or year 2. I really liked him a lot last year in the draft from a small school, but
6'8", 305 from North Dakota.
High athletic upside guy. It tested off the charts at the combine. So does he develop? Got 36-inch arms, like all those kind of things that check those boxes. Having a guy like that allows you to keep Tyler Smith at guard. But I think that group is they're the best group right now. Will they be the next? Will they be the best group in or the second best group in 2024? Probably not. I think they're just going to get too old and too banged up. But I think for this year, I think you feel really good about that group.
So then you've got the Giants and the Commanders, and they're going to start Giants being a rookie at center. They need a big improvement from Evan Neal.
Yeah.
They bring in a couple of pieces at guard, and then Thomas, how does he continue to develop after, I would say, probably a pretty disappointing season last year in the eyes of most people?
Andrew Thomas?
I mean, he got better. It was 2 years ago that he had a bad
2 years
year.
ago.
Yeah?
So he was probably, I think he graded for the first 8 games of the season as the top pass protecting tackle in football.
Yeah,
obviously
2 years ago he was real bad, and then last year he was.
It was awesome, and so he's a top 5 player. And so outside of Lane Johnson, maybe Jordan Mailata, I would put him. I'd say he's the second best lineman in the division. It's just one offensive lineman, one good offensive lineman does not a good O-line make. And so you're really counting on, again, I think Schmitz will be fine at center. I think that's a big improvement. It allows them to take the guy that was playing center for him last year and move him to guard, who I think is a pretty good football player. So it gets better, but I think the linchpin here, because right now I would actually rate the Commanders' offensive line ahead of the Giants.
Okay.
But it depends on how you feel about Evan Neal. If Evan Neal takes even a 25% improvement from last year, like they're a significantly better offensive line. And I think you kind of feel like, based on Andrew Thomas's improvement from year 1 to year 2, I think you could it's fairly safe to assume that whatever technique they're teaching up there takes a little bit of time to kind of dial in, and maybe you see an improvement. So if you get an improvement like you saw from Andrew Thomas into year 2 from Evan Neal, like, they might be better than Dallas. But it's all hinging on whether or not you think Evan Neal will be better or not.
Yeah, I would assume he's going to be better.
But
I
is he
don't
going to
know how
be
much. That's the obvious question.
Yeah, is he going to be Andrew Thomas better? Because Andrew Thomas went from like bad to like
Yeah,
really good. You know what I mean? And I don't know. You probably can't bank on that. But even if it's a percentage of that, and again, Evan Neal was not good last year. He struggle busted big time.
yeah.
So it's hard for me to envision him seeing that type of improvement, which is why I'm going to put them last on this list. But if he is good, if he is improved, I definitely think that could be a dangerous offensive line, which is weird to talk about in the context of offensive line.
Right. And obviously, what does what does Dable and
Yeah,
the scheme do to protect him? There's all kinds of questions to ask there. And we talked about some of those similar questions with the Washington offensive line to start the show on Monday. So if you missed that, we did our confidence rankings. Spoiler alert, considering it's the first thing in the podcast, that was the group we were least confident in. So if you want more thoughts on the Washington offensive line and you haven't heard that, go check out the show from earlier in the week. All right, next week we will do a similar exercise with the defensive units in the division, so you can definitely look forward to that. Leave a comment if you're watching on YouTube and let us know what you think. I'm sure the Giants, Eagles, and Cowboys fans will find this podcast and tell us how much we suck, because that's the NFL, baby. Give us the rivalries. Give us the internet banter. What did people do before the internet? They just traveled to other cities and threw snowballs at each other. NFC East, baby. Back in the days when the Arizona Cardinals were in it. Okay, that's enough. For Logan, I'm Craig. Everyone have a great rest of your week. See you nice and refreshed off vacation next week. Not exactly sure of our release schedule with the holiday, but we will put out 2 pods next week. So you can definitely look forward to that. As for when they'll drop, if you subscribe, they'll drop when they drop right into your feed. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the Odyssey app, YouTube, wherever you subscribe or follow, make sure that you are doing so. All right, that's it. That's all. And we'll see you next week on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.